Oh. Everybody, I'm here with Brian Hamilton today. Brian's a serial entrepreneur in the augmented headwear space. He was a founder of Realwear, which is certainly one of the leaders today. He's an executive at Digilens, and he's also a founder of a healthcare tech company focused on headwear called Hippo Technologies. So, Brian, you know all the details and the high points. Do you want to just round that out a little bit and tell us a little bit about what you focused on at those companies and in your entrepreneurial experience?
Sure. It's a pleasure to be here today with the NuCurrent team, and really excited about being able to speak to everybody today. So it's been an interesting career. Been in part of since the heads-up display space, pre even Microsoft HoloLens. Dating back to about 2013, we've been studying what's the future of mobile compute, how do we bring people heads up in their work, how do we integrate voice technologies, and in 2016, we looked at a lot of the companies that were coming out were not focused on the lowest common denominator of things that aren't fun. For example, compliance and regulatory and certifications and and IT integration and all the things that, go into the actual physical adoption of these products. So we created Realwear to think about what the intermediary step would be for heads-up display. So that was in 2016, and was there for 5+ years as a founder, and we took the company to moving over 100,000 headsets in the market, and that company is still progressing today. Part of my time also was in healthcare through the process. I was working in places like Africa, and we understood where we started looking at resource constraints, especially in the medical field, and realized that with these types of products that we could actually really help people by getting access in different ways and training people and having people that maybe don't have the full credentials be able to be supported by people with the full credentials and villages and all that. So I started another company called Hippo Technologies after Realwear, which got funded by Ochsner Health. And then I went on to Digilens, which is an optics company in Silicon Valley. It's been around for 15 years, backed by companies like Samsung Mobile and others, where we're trying to change the future of mobile compute via waveguide technology. And we looked at how the future of the space and realized that we felt like we needed to build a product for the industrial and enterprise space because we thought AR pass-through would not be the way to go, that we want to have true immersion in our AR experiences. So currently leading that sales and marketing organization at Digilens, and we're working on everything from next generation of optics to the future heads-up display NRE programs with companies like Qualcomm, and also working obviously to proliferate heads-up display via our Digilens Argo system.
Yeah, what an amazing journey. And I mean, you've been ahead of the big wave, and I think we can both agree that the wave is starting to come to shore in a big way with both the AR side, but also I think increasingly with the smart glasses side. I think that one's come pretty quickly with the Ray-Ban Metas on the consumer side, and the industrial area has been using it much longer. But I think it says something that now consumers are willing and wanting to wear smart glasses around just in their regular daily life. So I'm kind of curious, given that you've been, at this for around a decade now, and you've really been ahead of the wave, if you will. What do you see as, how do you think about features when it comes to designing headwear, as you call it? There's sometimes overkill, or there's sometimes the need to pack so much technology in, but then there's other times you need to create a minimum viable product. So how do you look at it, and how have you seen the most successful companies think about the trade-off between adding features and sticking with something a little bit more basic?
Yeah, absolutely. So, there's always a balance in this. And to give a shout out to NuCurrent for a second, you guys are actually super relevant with your core company because of the opportunity to think about power and power consumption. And, we need a cordless and untethered world, basically, just as much as we need a hands-free and situational awareness-based world. So power and battery life is one of those main things when you think about features and the trade-offs that is really critical. So I'll start with a big shout out to you and the work that you're doing
Thank you.
At NuCurrent. Also, from our perspective, I want to break this down in kind of like my daily life now versus the feature sets I think that are important for the most important next steps. Number one, obviously, if I wasn't giving a plug to the optics world, I wouldn't be doing my service myself here. But basically, the number one thing that we're seeing right now is that people are moving to, they want to have a new form of mobile compute, a new interface in front of their face, right? And the key is always in the form factor. What size are these devices? What are the weight? Other metrics that are really important features inside of the waveguide side, and then I'll get to the product side, are things like transparency. For example, when you're interacting with a human person, if they look like they're in ski goggles with, no disrespect to any product out there, or if they look like they're in sunglasses, you want to be able to bring a real human-to-human interaction. So transparency is the ability to engage with people and be able to see the naked eye. And be able to engage with them like you would be like with me wearing my glasses right here. The other thing,
and just to clarify real quickly, it's interesting because you're talking. I want you to confirm this, but I think you're talking about the third party. You're talking about the third party's ability to see the first party's eyeballs. So the person wearing the glasses, which is a little bit of a different focus than what a lot of people always think about the wearer. But you're actually thinking about the people the wearer is interacting with. Is that correct?
100%. And many different things that have nothing to do with technology have caused many products to fail. It's the psychological aspect of the adoption. It's the way it looks. There's a lot of reason why the products could fail in the market. And a lot of it's just psychology or the integration with personal protective equipment. And if you walk in and have something so disruptive to a worker, a consumer, a government, and have something that's going to require them to change whatever they're wearing or however they do work, it's a recipe for failure. So the key is to come in and have a form factor that allows you to be as normal as possible wearing these technologies for the future adoption and utilization. So transparency, you're exactly right. I'm thinking about the person that's engaged with the person who's in this technology and how they see that person as they're engaging. And there's a lot of issues to unpack there. There's privacy, there's security, there's IT, there's data, the list goes on and on. So the key is to build a normalization baseline that allows people to feel comfortable with the people that are now engaging with these technologies for the future of mobile compute. So that's transparency being one of the keys in optics.
Yeah. When you talk about this third party experience, it does make me think about the privacy and also the security and opt-in nature. So correct me if I'm wrong, but you spend most of your time more in enterprise settings or industrial settings. And so I think your privacy issues or your customers' privacy issues are a little bit different because if a factory decides to augment their workforce with headsets, they can opt into recording anything or whatever is happening in that facility. Whereas in a consumer setting, if I wear my glasses to the beach, not everyone else at that beach is opted into me wearing those, recording, streaming. How have you, I know this isn't the main focus of our conversation, but in general, and since you've been doing this for over a decade, how have you looked at privacy and where do you think that's going?
I think it's a great point. Privacy is different things for different people and different settings. So, privacy is about, being using in an industrial setting. It's maybe the data, it's not collecting data. It's making sure no third-party data is transferred or stored. If it's in healthcare, it's thinking about GDPR and HIPAA and those regulations of patient confidentiality. In the consumer world, it's protecting against doxing or fraudulent behavior. It's also the whole thing about recording people when they don't want to be recorded. So the way we've thought about it, and you have to segment this by type, but the way we've thought about it is on the industrial side, there's a lot of control you can do with on-prem networks and for the U.S. government, for example, EOTech certifications to be able to get on their networks, making sure no data is actually coming over, even removing some of the cloud parameters. And the most important thing, I think, to combat all this is being able to work at the metal layer or the chip layer. There's a really important scenario here where we need to engage deeper with the Qualcomms and the MediaTeks of the world and those kind of companies, because Yeah, at Digilens on the Argo product specifically, we have source code level access. And that's really important when we're working in different environments, because sometimes you got to turn off Bluetooth. Sometimes you got to turn off RF. You've got to understand the parameters that are in place for connecting these things to the network. Ironically, also in the industrial sector, we were working in oil and gas many years ago. And one of the big concerns on refineries with EOTech certification on these products was people recording for, you might be in the Middle East somewhere and they don't want you to see the surrounding areas or know where things are from a security standpoint. So done something as simple as place a little piece of plastic over top of the camera that you flip up.
Sure.
That, like having to go through that, like a 2-cent piece of plastic, and then you pull it up, or being able to work into the protocols that are required from the IT people as it relates to security and what they can record and how. On the consumer side, it's a little more tricky because you can't control what people are doing. So it's following suit with the same, challenges, walking down the street, taking a photo of somebody with your mobile phone. It's going to come down to making sure that we protect how that information is published. And and looking at things like doxing, I mean, how do you, if you're standing in front of somebody and, how do you protect against, somebody fraudulently coming up to you, pretending like they know you or things like that. But these are all in the behaviors. This is all similar challenges that are happening in the current mobile phone world right now today as well.
It is. It is the same issues. I think the complexity that comes is the seamlessness of the newer wave of technologies here. And you guys are working on making the waveguide technology small and seamless so you can see people's eyeballs, and other companies are working on really integrating fashion into these glasses. That it's not really just Meta's glasses, it's Ray-Ban Metas or Oakley Meta or Warby with Google. And so there's the fashion angle, and part of the desire is to make them look like the glasses you're wearing right now, make them look fashionable. So the more seamless the technology gets, the more people want to wear them. Absolutely. But at the same time, the more invisible it gets. It's different to see someone holding a phone in front of my face. I know they're recording versus a beautiful pair of Ray-Bans, and you don't know if they're smart glasses or not. So I think the challenges on one hand are the same. And on the other hand, the seamlessness and invisibility of the technology is kind of introducing. And then there's the AI layer on top of that. 100%. So one of the things I'm picking up on, and again, what I'm really thinking about, you have a deep expertise in, is this idea of kind of feature creep versus focus when you're thinking about building products, especially since you've worked across a variety of end use cases, and all the use cases have different things that are important, features that are important versus features that are noise. One of the things you were just talking about that I think is really interesting are features that are very obvious and evident to the end user. It's like the selling features. And that could be a heads-up display with a certain field of view or a certain resolution. The hidden features are also very interesting. And I'm wondering if you talk about how to balance those from a product perspective. And so hidden features would be, for example, the protocols that you're basically building onto the bare metal. That security and safety is super important for military applications. It reminds me of BlackBerry. Back in the 2000s, they were talking about they built from hardware up the security and safety. That's why it was a better enterprise handset. But those were a lot of hidden features versus the iPhones that had the flashy screens and consumer applications. So how do you think about balancing hidden features versus obvious selling features, especially in the dynamic of finding your focus and not just throwing as many features as possible into a product?
Yeah, that's a complex question. I mean, it's a very good question. The number one thing I think to touch on when you talk about hidden features, you've got to be looking at a bunch of things that go into the device. Number one, obviously, it all starts at the OS and firmware layer. You've got to be able to have a software. And one of the things I think that's missing from our industry that, we take a look at Nuance being acquired by Microsoft, for example, for $16 billion. Is voice. And is there going to ever be a standardization of APKs and ways that you can bring forward on it? So we're an Android platform with our Argo system, for example. We are working on AOSP right now as we're waiting for kind of Android XR to, come forward. And there's some new chips and things out there that would allow it to be more open source. But to your point, there's a lot of things that are kind of invisible to the products that make it successful when you're thinking about the balance. Number one, obviously, is just the transparency of a waveguide. We're talking about the optics. Another one is the eye glow. You either realize that people are lit up like a cyborg or they're not. And when you talk about military applications, number one thing that we really focus on is reduction in eye glow as we think about field of view trade-offs as it relates to optics. And I'm going to get out of optics in a minute, but part of the reason why the U.S. government had so much challenge with the IVAS program, which has been rebranded to Soldier-Borne Mission Command now, was, and my hat's off to Microsoft. This isn't an anti-Microsoft thing. I really appreciate and have a lot of friends at Microsoft and HoloLens, and they did a great job, seeding the market with everything. So, but one of the challenges is being able to have, make sure you're controlling light the right way. And so there's a bunch of challenges in the space. One is the form factors, being too big, the limited battery life, the ability to actually manufacture these products is very difficult. The supply chain adds the complexity. And then also the ability to control light. So we do it through nanomaterials and photopolymer. So we're a materials-based company at our core. So when you put a light engine behind our waveguide technology, it becomes the brightest, the most efficient technology out there. Our Argo products getting over 3,500 nits to the eye. So being able to work in indoor and outdoor use. So these are the things, like when you look at a product, you're not thinking about, okay, what's the field of view of that waveguide? You're thinking, does this person look normal? What features are visible? So we look at things that, some of the most important features that we look at when we're balancing this. And we go through also the EVT, DVT, PVT, and MP process. So everything needs to go through engineering validation testing where you're building your PRDs, you're looking at what features to trade off, and you're looking at the use case. If you really know, if you're solving something on a first time use for a use case, that's a highly focused device. So when you look at all these different scenarios, when you go through engineering validation testing to do a PRD, to design where you're actually validation testing where you're doing tooling. Once you lock on your tooling, then you go to production and get your certifications and get the mass production. Similar to the Apple model for the way they build devices. But some of the key elements, I think, that are sometimes not recognizable that are part of the system. And obviously all at the software layer, but at the hardware layer, it's clear glanceable displays with low latency that are readable in different lightings. You wouldn't know that from looking at the glasses or the product. Is it clear display? Is it low latency? Is it, and you work in all different environments? Very, very important. We talked a little bit about standardization of voice and gesture controls. It needs to feel totally natural and unobtrusive. It needs to be natural. Lightweight and comfortability. Again, all trade-offs. Like everybody assumes they want the largest field of view possible, but there's huge trade-offs on field of view. That's why Magic Leap has a big battery pack in it, and all the batteries is one of the limiting factors for sure. So battery life and power consumption, very, very important. We talked about privacy, and then you touched on it too. Some of the features that you won't see but will experience have to do with the integration of AI. So one of the big things that's very powerful in the smart glasses space, when you think about features, it doesn't have to be related to the hardware, even though you can use different sensor packages in it, is really around agentic AI. What's the most important form factor there for that is it needs to be contextually aware, a personal AI assistant that's actually intelligent, useful, and doesn't interfere with what you're doing. So, it's going to basically give you the information that becomes seamless human-to-human interactions. Think of voice, eye tracking, gestures, subtle visual cues. Nobody wants to be the glass hole of the future, if you remember back to the Google side of things. But the compelling use cases that I see in the AI stuff that's happening right now that are maybe seamless to the end user or the person on the other side of the glasses. I always try to think about it from not just from the wearer perspective, but from the person that's interacting. But there's some really compelling next generation use cases that agentic AI are doing. Number one is around the future of workflow. In the old world, it was sticking a PDF in a document and putting in and then testing a QA pathway on workflows. Today's world, this does my right hand, my left hand, my right hand, my phone, and my pen. In the new world, I can take these objects with my camera, and again, you won't see this from the product, but it knows if my homework is to exchange my hands with the products, then the camera can tell me that my left hand moved to my right hand, et cetera, et cetera. And if I did it wrong, it will tell me that I did it wrong. So that's a next generation way to think about the workflow of the future being, and the canvas being the true world in front of us. Also, there's some amazing things like real-time translation. We think about language, and we think about the way that we are in a global world and interacting with people from different parts of the world in different languages. Visual task guidance, those kind of things, navigation and facial recognition, logistics and law enforcement, for example. We're doing some stuff in the law enforcement and the DoD space. We're doing a lot of work in that now for the future of MRO, maintenance, repair, overhaul. And then obviously hands-free productivity for the enterprise users, and also freedom for the consumer to be situationally aware and be able to have this tool when they need it. So there's a lot of sensor integration discussions that can happen. I always believe you always have to start when you look at the feature sets. You got to work backwards. You got to start from the KPIs. What are you trying to measure and what are you trying to accomplish? So start at the use case level, document what you're trying, how you're being measured by using technology, and work backwards. And maybe you don't need a 48 megapixel camera in the front or a thermal sensor attached or time of flight for something. So you gotta start from the bottom and work backwards. And when you're building a product, you have to start from the top, meaning you got to look at probably the most unsexy part of this business. What is compliance? How are you going to do data security? Like, those are the things entrepreneurs should be thinking about. If you're thinking about building a headset today, start with the hard problems first. Embrace the IT conversations first and right away.
Yeah. So just that answer. Well, first of all, it shows the breadth and depth of your knowledge in the space, but it also highlights just how much technology can be packed into these head-worn devices. But given the trade-offs that you're talking about, weight, balance, seamless, fashion, decisions always have to be made. And I completely agree that you really need to start with the customer and the job to be done. Or in a design thinking framework, you would say, what's the problem statement? Start with the problem statement, and then you can build up underneath that. And I think listening to you, what I'm hearing is we talked about selling features versus invisible features. And some of these invisible features are like the baseline table stakes for any products. They have to, for example, we think about some of the core platform technologies that are required for every single type of glasses. We usually define those as communication. So they need some sort of Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, or cellular, and they need to be able to communicate. They need to have processing. You've talked a lot about the work you do with Qualcomm and MediaTek and others. So there's the processing. There's the input output. So sometimes that's microphones and cameras, sometimes that's haptics, sometimes it's heads-up displays, but there's so many different things that you need to either bring in or put out, and that kind of changes depending on the application. And then fundamentally, there's also the need for power. Every one of these is battery powered. It's in that power encompasses the need for charging, but it also includes the need for sensing. And how do you use power efficiently and effectively to drive all the IO and processing? So I think those 4 pillars are super important. Those are going to be in everything. And then you have your selling features and your differentiating features that are different if it's a police application, if it's a military application, if it's a consumer application. And there's so much opportunity for companies to leverage this new emerging technology and the AI to increase their footprint in core markets. And one of the things I encourage entrepreneurs, and interested in your take, I encourage them to focus on niches, but big niches, where there is a difference between how firefighters will use the technology and how electricians will use the technology. But fundamentally, head-worn displays are really valuable in both areas. They just have slightly different needs.
100%. There's a lot of Trojan horse opportunities to learn in the space. So it makes the story of the Trojans. You go on the horse and come out in the city. There's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of amazing companies out there doing amazing work in AI that are sitting on some of the top cloud consumption platforms in the world, with Azure and Google and with Gemini and all this as well. So there's a lot of companies that are solving in that niche now for AI that are great partnership companies for anybody who's thinking about building smart glasses. So AI is a Trojan horse for getting in the infrastructure when a traditional pathway may take you a lot longer. So being able to look at and be able to have a true agentic AI integration, I think can speed up that and help to identify that. I agree with you 100%. You need to focus on a large enough, total addressable market. At the same token, you got to be focused, because sometimes a use case for the government, for repairing a truck is going to be very different than, somebody climbing a telephone pole, or that sensor package is going to be completely different. So I agree wholeheartedly that, focus, look at the feature sets that are important to solving a core problem and use case, and address that problem statement from the beginning, and also lean into IT and lean into compliance. And the other thing to think about here is supply chain. You've got to be very conscientious of supply chain. Light engines are very difficult. We've all been studying the micro LEDs and the LCOS, and we've actually built one of the world's smallest LCOS projectors of Digilens now. And, we're light engine agnostic. So you've got to look at every aspect. How do you change the properties of these things quickly, cost effectively? The other thing is getting your bill of materials down to a level where you can be profitable. And so you've got to have a BOM that allows you to have a business. Simultaneously, you got to think about the total cost of ownership of these devices, and that includes hardware, software integration. And so we need it for the consumer market. We definitely need the bill of materials needs to be as low as possible, but maybe tied to an OpEx and subscription-based scenario that can accelerate it as well. But I agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah, right there. I was just going to ask you, what business models are you seeing emerging? Because I think when you think about bill of materials, oftentimes if you're thinking about it just from like a legacy hardware perspective, you're like, how much does the laptop cost and how much margin is there? But there's a lot more subscription type models coming into play. And I'm thinking with the AR, VR boom accompanying with the AI boom and the merging of those two areas, I feel like innovation in the business model is I don't know what it's going to be, but I feel like there's a pretty good chance that that's going to help lead to some major breakthrough. Have you seen anything interesting there?
Yeah, a bunch of things. This goes back to your first question about the hidden technologies that are there. We're working on a program called DigiSaaS, which is about engaging the ISV or independent software vendor community. So there's a couple different ways to think about that. Number one is if you're going to build homegrown, out of the box applications that just come out of the box and work. MDM is really important, by the way. So you got to get MDM embraced, but post an MDM, mobile device management platform like an Intune. Do you have homegrown software that allows you to do basic work instructions, remote expert, digital twin, data visualization, et cetera, et cetera. But then there's a lot of third parties out there that are selling very successful software formerly on HoloLens and also on mobile phones and tablets. And so those scenarios, what we're seeing in business models now is that there's an opportunity now to incentivize the channel and the partners at volume, because there's a lot more into this. So if you just sell a hardware piece of device and that's it, that's your total ability to keep your business funded and your revenue building, right? So the play is to think about an OpEx play. So I'm seeing a lot more of OpEx come in, where especially as we bring down the cost of these devices, it all comes down to budgets, but an opportunity to bundle the solutions. Now, it's more complicated than you would think, because when you have software, every software's got its different costs. It's got its terms and conditions. It's got its data residency considerations, based on where you're deploying the technology in the world. So it is not as easy as just say, go make this happen. But the bottom line is we're starting to see a lot more requests from the enterprise and industrial space around, we want one throat to choke on these pieces of hardware. And we'd like to think about an OpEx model around the hardware. So we're starting to see that, or subscription model. There's some opportunity to really partner with the cloud companies in a unique way as well. One of the things that's really important at the end of each year, if you're Microsoft or Google or AWS, Amazon, you're going to have your annual reviews on cloud consumption every year. So these products allow you to have many different types of discussions around cloud. And also, if you can attribute cloud consumption to these devices, and then you potentially become relevant for these massive behemoths that are kind of controlling the cloud architectures in the world today. It gets relevant. So getting into the Microsoft marketplaces and the Google marketplaces through partners, I think, is another very interesting opportunity. But for our perspective, we're a little different. One of the challenges in a lot of product companies out there that are trying to build heads-up display in this world today, and I don't say this with any disrespect, but they're not root science companies. They're taking pieces of things and putting it together to make a product. The way we look at it is the key for anything you do, either on the IP level or on the design level, is to think about what your root science is. What do you consider your root science? And that root science is your core technology that everything else is built on. For Digilens, that's waveguides. That's waveguide technology. It's the ability to manufacture and have a price point lower than anything in the world with the highest level of efficiency. But there's even if you're just starting out in the space as an entrepreneur, what is your root science? It could be in methodologies, it could be in design, it could be in software integration. But think about what your root science is, because that's what's going to differentiate you in the markets against other players that are coming out.
Yeah, and for Digilens, you're in such an important area. If you listen to what Mark Zuckerberg talks about of, his ambition of replacing smartphones with glasses, the only way to do that is with some really rich display context. And you're really pushing that core science in that area. So I think when I talked earlier about foundational technologies and the 4 different foundational technologies, you fit in the category of input outputs. It's an output technology, but at the same time, it's one of the most critical output technologies that every company is really trying to figure out how are they going to do display so that they can give text notifications, visual insight, not just audio. So I want to plant a seed of an idea, and then I want to move on to kind of like the 3 questions I like to ask every guest that joins us. The seed of an idea I want to plant is, I've been thinking about this a lot lately. So this is not a fully baked thought, Brian, but you talked about the pathway into the market and partnership through the major cloud companies. So Microsoft, Meta, and Google predominantly. One of the things I've been thinking about that's kind of a corollary to that is the growing, the major CapEx investments in AI factories. And so the idea that you have Tesla that has 2 different types of factories, right? They have their factories to make cars and robots, and then they have factories to literally produce the AI that can empower those. And what I think the race for the face and any kind of headsets, whether it's VR headsets or AR headsets, or just basic smart glasses, I think that those are major inputs. They're external inputs to the AI factories. And so what I mean by that is, like, these are like the billions of distributed nodes that are out there in the world seeing the context, feeding the AI factories. So those AI factories can produce really super intelligent insights that improve humanity. So again, not a fully baked thought, but I think when you think about cloud and the big data servers, I think it's also important to start thinking about AI factories and all of these NVIDIA clusters going up, and like the need to dramatically increase the energy production in the US just to keep up with the AI factories.
I very good insight. And, you might have read about the $200 billion deal that got done for AI data centers in the UAE, with the big players, BlackRock and Microsoft involved in that as well. You're dead on right with that. And if you think about the future, moving away, let's take the Middle East for a second. You're thinking about moving away from the oil economy. You're moving into that new form of energy.
Absolutely.
If you follow the capital and follow the people that are the influencers in the space, you're starting to see a lot of those deals take place behind the scenes. And these are at governmental levels. These are like presidential level initiatives to think about how you're going to fortify and be able to, have control of that next form of energy and the next form of oil, which is you're describing. Absolutely.
I think there's real oil and real energy and coal and natural gas and nuclear, because the power consumption is so important. So even though the old oil is still super important, but I think the new oil you're talking about is the data, the context. And I truly believe, as much as we can get off of our cell phones and off of our search histories and off of like, textual interface with tools like OpenAI and ChatGPT, it's going to grow up by multiple orders of magnitude when people are wearing their contextual devices seamlessly every day. So I think it's going to be such a big, it's such a huge opportunity. I've never seen anything like this in my life. And I would venture to say no human beings on earth have ever seen such a big emerging technology trend ever in the history of humanity.
I would agree. And with that comes great responsibility, right?
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And parameters and what's the future look like and how do we work? That's why, like, whenever people talk about AI, I always say, look, it's here. You can either embrace it or it can embrace you. You gotta lean forward and figure out how to work in that new world, because there's no stopping it at this point. And, I think the future of jobs and work are going to change, but I think if we do things responsibly, that it's still hopefully going to be a very bright future for everybody.
I agree. There's a good side and a bad side, and both have to be focused on, but you have to embrace it. So let me do this. I'm going to ask you 3 questions. Just kind of interested. These aren't something you prepared for. We didn't send these in advance, so I'm looking for your gut take here. Okay. So the first one, what's the most overrated feature right now in AI and XR?
That's funny. There's a couple. If you haven't ever seen it, you've got to go watch the Saturday Night Live Google Glass Saturday Night Live from many years ago. So just Google Saturday Night Live, okay. Google Glass, where basically he's trying to connect it and he's going like this, peacock, and he's moving his head around. And I don't want to give it away; it's too funny. Okay. But I think that if you haven't seen it, it's absolutely worth 4.5 minutes of your time. I still watch it regularly.
I haven't seen it. Now I have something to look forward to. Thank you.
Hilarious. I think right now, today's world, one of the most overused features is the overload on gesture controls. And so, we talk about being a human again. And, you remember back when the glass hole concept with Google Glass, again, no disrespect to Google. Google actually led and was amazing.
Absolute pioneering technology.
100%. So I'm not knocking Google. There was also a really funny picture.
But so was the Apple Newton, and it still took another 10 years for the iPhone to came around.
Absolutely. There's also a really funny picture of somebody wearing Apple Vision Pro walking down the streets of New York City.
Yeah. And I have seen that one.
You've seen that one, right? And again, no disrespect to Apple. I give Apple total credit for putting out a device. I just wish it wasn't an AR pass-through, but that's a different conversation. And I think Apple's going to come out with some amazing products because that's what they do.
They have to.
Absolutely. And I think they're going to continue to be a great leader along with, Meta and Samsung and there's a lot of really interesting companies, new products coming out of places like India as well. But I think going back to your question, the overhype on swiping in the air, flicks, head nods, just looking awkward, doing things. It's an opportunity to remove the drawing attention scenario. The inconsistent, it brings frustration of physical movements. Most users want to just tap once and use their voice. But you want to go for the minimalistic approach as it relates to the piece.
I love the answer. And one of the things that it made me think about, I really feel like I could hear Steve Jobs reflected in what you were saying about, the story about him really hating the magic mouse.
Yeah.
And he's like, why would we have a mouse when we have pointers right here? We have everything we need right here. And I just think whether it's the head twitching, the triple tapping, the learning how to, type with your fingers like this, I feel like there must be better, more natural ways. And so I like your take on that. Here's the second question. What's the most underrated metric that actually signals that now is the time for adoption?
The most underrated metric. That's a great question too. It's a couple different things. So it depends on the use case. Again, there's some use cases that are just purely about cost savings. Like, being able to think about, a one-time use ROI is where you hope to get. Okay. Imagine, in a specific machinery world, won't say the name of the company, that you have plants, bottling plants or other plants on some kind of other part of the planet. And you've got a certain amount of people that have to work on that. How do you cut down on that travel cost? I mean, if you can automatically have a one-time ROI example that can really drive that utilization. The other things, the metrics I think are very important to look at are time on tools. When you're using something physically environment, how do you measure the outputs without being invasive on the worker? But time on tools is a thing, like when you're learning and training. And then
have you seen anything there? So two quick questions to follow up on that. One, that's one of those kind of like hidden layer features. That's that IT layer where they can calculate time on tool and usefulness in an unintrusive way. Are you or other people building that in? And then two, have you seen any results on that metric where you're starting to say, wow, there's a major increase in time on tool?
Yeah, I mean, I think agentic AI is starting to do that at a next level, where you can start to really use the real world to you don't do exactly the wrench turn at the level that you need, or how often, or what are your efficiencies when you're doing things? How do you do the job right the first time? So we're starting to see some of that. I'm starting to see some of that in agentic AI. That's pretty exciting because you're basically doing it through objects and through pre-prescribed workflows.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, time on tools can be in many things. It is a tool, but it also could be time on work. And looking at things like metrics like rework. If you can cut down on the amount of rework or having to go back and do a job the second time, or and then also the onboarding and new people, I think is very powerful. It's a new opportunity to upskill people in real time with what they're doing. But yeah, we're starting to see some time on tools things. There's always been things in the dream of, what I'll call passive condition monitoring as well in industrial. So, you put these headsets on, they can hear things that you can't hear with your ear. How do you look at efficiencies in a passive environment, where somebody could say, alert, machine 3 is running at 68% today. Yep. Start looking at that. Those are time on tasks, but also time on tools when people are physically doing things. And how do you reduce weight and reduce what a worker has to carry? It doesn't matter if you're a soldier or you're an industrial person climbing a telephone pole, or doing up a wind farm. You want to minimalize the tool sets that you have to have. It could be having to have a flashlight with you, or carrying a piece of equipment that makes your job easier and you're more lighter and able to move more freely. The other one is confined spaces, being able to protect people having to go into confined spaces. A lot of really interesting use cases and things like nuclear and otherwise. But yeah, we're starting to see some of this through the agentic AI, and people have been testing against these types of technologies for a long time. There's a great case study that's public from Boeing that they did many years ago, where they were showing how time on tools, how people were working in AR that would speed things up and cut down on the error rate and the having to do rework. So looking at all those equations, I think is very important.
A lot of the error rates or passive sensing, those are things that will really drive your first key metric, which is the cost and the ROI. If you do some preventative maintenance on that machine in a way that a human wouldn't have detected it, but the one time you do that, it probably pays for your entire headset lineup, depending on the machine, depending on the cost of repair versus breakage. But that's where you get into just disproportionate asymmetric ROIs on investing in these technologies. All right, here's my last question. What's one misconception from the press or the public that you think is wasting the most time or creating the most noise when there's so much signal and opportunity? What is the public or press focusing on that's just, they're not looking at the right part of the equation?
That's a very loaded question too. Love it though. Number one, I think I always talk about, we need Alka-Seltzer the space, and it's unfortunate. There's been a lot of hangovers in the space. There's been a lot of challenge in the space. I think one of the things that's a misconception right now is that we have to go through an evolution where audio only devices is needed as a bridge. It is a bridge, but I think we can jump right to the next form of mobile compute. And again, selfishly, because of what I know around optics now, I know that the display world is ready now. It is truly ready.
Okay.
And
Great.
so, but there's still a misconception that you need to spend hundreds of millions of dollars in CapEx to build out these, facilities, and that the price points and on products and optics have to be a certain level. They don't. They can come down very significantly. And we're doing that right now through our approach in optics. But I think the misconception is that I think that the press does, to answer your question more directly, is we lump in too many things into what we call XR and AR. We just start throwing things into the bucket. And now it's this broad definition. And we need to get more specific in our definitions and the way that we're approaching communication in this category, because this category has been around. If you take a look back to the 1960s, where we see some of the first headsets. And so think about that. I mean, that's, pretty fast to go, 60 years, whatever, 70 years coming up. It's still very short in the relevancy of the human race in terms of time. But a lot of these use cases have been around since the 1960s. And at some point that the idea of redefining how we define AR, XR, and stop throwing things into it. And I think you're going to see a similar thing happen in AI. I think as AI matures, all of a sudden AI is going to get bigger, bucketed, and there's going to be things that are going to be tangential to AI, just like in AR and XR, that are maybe not part of the core definition of what you're trying to solve.
So I really love the answer about there's so much getting bucketed in, and so that creates some confusion. If you were if you got to write the rules about how people talked about the various categories of XR, what's one way you might think about focusing the conversation better?
I think focusing the conversation, there needs to be more programs for rapid prototyping and getting people to look at, different things for what a form factor means to them. So I think the rules, I think we need to come together more of a co-opetition, more consortium-based approach where the companies are getting together to help one another to really prop up the ecosystem. So I really believe ecosystem is critical. To be successful in this category, you've got to have great light engines, you've got to have great optics, you've got to have great chips, you got all these different things. So how do we, rewriting the narrative a little bit, how do we take down some of these silos of communication from big tech to companies like Digilens and other companies that are, scale ups at this point, right? How do we take down barriers and really help the internal teams that have been studying these things for years and help them take it from a concept to design? It's kind of like a little bit of a leap of faith. Whenever we're talking to people about non-recurring engineering programs and all this, we're always like, let us help you get there, because there's so many dependencies where these products can go wrong. So you've got to have a leap of faith moment where you're like, all right, I trust in this company is going to get me to the right PRD based on my use case. And we start looking at the world differently on the way that we're working together. So I think we need to really think about how do we come together as a community and redefine the different aspects of AR and XR and AI and make sure that we're talking about the core competencies of it and not keep layering in all these other things that can get you in trouble. We need to be dreamers, but we also need to get to be realists and have these breakthrough moments, which I think are coming over the next couple of years.
I love that. There's so much more to talk about here, but I think that's a great place to end it. I'm sure we could do a whole nother thing on vertical technologies versus horizontal technologies and ecosystems and all of that. But it's been a pleasure to talk to you, Brian. You have just a wealth of experience as an entrepreneur, a thought leader, a technologist in this space. And it's been really good connecting. And I really appreciate you having shared your time with us. So thank you.
Thank you. It's been an honor being here. Thank you so much.